Welcome into the Art Gibbs Sports Business Podcast. Every so often, there comes an achievement, sports achievement, some type of conquest that captures the hearts and minds of fans of a city, of a country, community. And the Miami Dolphins in 1972, going 17-0, is one of those such achievements. It's something that had never been done before, was thought to be impossible before it was done, and has never been done since. A perfect NFL season. And Miami grew and changed along with the team and throughout the Dolphins' time in Miami, i.e., the Dolphins arrived in Miami to a much different Miami than they're now currently in. That story is told of the 17-0 season, of Miami, how it used to be, and how it would become in the fantastic book 17-0 by Marshall John Fisher. And we are lucky to have him join us today on the Art Gibbs Sports Business Podcast. So welcome in Marshall John Fisher on his book 17-0. All right, so we're joined here by Marshall John Fisher, the author of the book 17-0, and you can see it behind me here if you're watching. It's got an incredible cover. That's what initially drew it to me, a very Miami cover, and also a very Miami title, 17-0, with the 17 spelled out, the word and then OH. So I guess just to kind of start, what led you to want to write this book?
Yeah, well, I was there. I was a kid growing up in Miami in 1972. I was a 9-year-old new fan of the Dolphins, and my dad and brother and I were very into the team, and we watched this perfect season unfold, and it really made a great impression on me, and I think it did on everybody who was not just, I was going to say as kids growing up there, but I think everyone in Miami who was following the team. It made a huge impression on them, and I always wanted to write about them. I was waiting, and then finally, with the 50th anniversary sneaking up on us, I finally decided now's the time. So, a few years ago, I got going on it and got it out in time for the 50th anniversary.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and that like the young kid, perfect season, big season. I remember when I was young, we were in Tennessee, and the Tennessee Titans made it to the Super Bowl in one of the first years they were in Nashville, and it was that way. You're kind of hooked in.
Right.
But yeah, Miami, I didn't grow up there, but I've been there several times. It's kind of a magical place. I heard a funny quote one time that said, the best part of Miami, the best part about Miami is that it's so close to the United States. And there's kind of it really is like another world. You drive south of Orlando and it really changes. You almost feel like you're in another country, a different energy.
Yeah. The funny thing is though, in 72, it was very different than it is now.
What was it like then?
Miami changed a lot in the 80s and 90s. And part of what I write about in the book is what Miami was like at that time. Because the book is not just about the football team, but about Miami at that time, about our country, what was going on behind the scenes. I mean, it's all about the team and the season, but also the backdrop. And Miami at that time was very different. It was a quieter place. It was sort of a sleepy, vacation town. It had some Latin American population, but not nearly as much as came in the 80s and later. And it was people never thought it could support a football team or any major sports team. And in fact, at that time when the Dolphins came into being in 1966, and still in 72, they were the only major sporting team in the whole state of Florida. So lets you know just how different things were then. It was a very different place.
And how was the team accepted when they first got there? And was there a difference between that and by the time they started to have so much success?
Yeah, I mean, it was an oddity at first. This team, the Joe Robbie, who started the team, he wasn't even a millionaire. He was he was a lawyer from South Dakota, and he just happened to find his way into starting the sports team. They were but they didn't have a big following in the early years. They were an expansion team. The first 4 years, they didn't win many games, and they were kind of, I don't know, they were the butt of a lot of jokes. Although, to be honest, for an expansion team, they weren't that bad. They, you got to start slowly. And but when Don Shula came in 1970, Robbie was able to lure Don Shula away from the Baltimore Colts, and that changed everything. And they immediately started winning. 1970, his very first year, they won 10 games, went to the playoffs, and they caught on like wildfire in South Florida. They became huge. And the next year they went to the Super Bowl. At 72, every game was a sellout. Fans were screaming and waving the white hankies because Rick Weaver on WIOD got the fans to bring white hankies and wave them so he could see if they were listening to him. That's how it started. But it became the sea of white in the Orange Bowl. So from 1970 on, they were huge.
They were huge, yeah. And so was that people coming from all over Florida, or was that driven by support just sort of from South Florida, or?
Yeah, it's really South Florida, I think. Although I think people around the state probably did adopt them as their team because there weren't many. I mean, there was Atlanta, I guess, as the closest team. So I think all over the state people adopted the Dolphins. Although I think in the stands it was mostly South Floridians, but and certainly the mania was much greater in South Florida. But I do think if you find people my age or older who were from all around the state, they probably remember that team as their team.
Sure. So in that 17-0 season, did it? What was some of the backdrop? Did it start out just like any other season? I know you mentioned they had gone to the Super Bowl. What was the feeling like during that time? Did they lose a lot of players after the Super Bowl, or were they kind of coming in as favorites to repeat? What was kind of the backdrop for the beginning?
Well, it's interesting. They didn't get a lot of respect even after getting to the Super Bowl. Maybe because they got beat badly in the Super Bowl VI by Dallas. And that really was the catalyst to the perfect season because Don Shula, he had lost the Super Bowl up in Baltimore, and now he lost one down here. And he was getting to be known as the guy who couldn't win the big one, even though he was the most famous coach in football. So he just became obsessed with getting back and winning the Super Bowl. And he transmitted that to each and every player. And even though it was the same, they didn't lose anyone. It was this, they even gained a few players in 72. They brought down Earl Morrall for one thing in 72, and he turned out to be crucial because Greasy, their all-pro quarterback, got hurt, and 38-year-old Earl Morrall came in and won 11 games for them. So, but even when they were going into the Super Bowl and undefeated at 15, they were 16-0 going into the Super Bowl. A lot of people still weren't picking them to win. Jimmy the Greek famously picked Washington to win the Super Bowl by a point. So, they had a hard time getting respect. And I think even over the years, a lot of people don't give them quite as much credit as they deserve, I think.
Sure. And you said Shula kind of imparted that, intensity and fire to show that they could win the big one on each and every player. Are there any sort of stories from that, or what to provide some color on what that would like, the practices?
Yeah, well, the players I talked to remembered even on the plane home from Super Bowl VI, or even in the locker room, I think he said to them, remember how you feel right now and make sure you never feel this way again. And Vern Denherter, one of the defensive linemen, told me that on the plane ride home, he was walking around to each player and saying pretty much the same thing. Start thinking about next year and how we're gonna get rid of this feeling, this horrible feeling we have of humiliation, getting crushed on the biggest stage, And then Zonka remembers the first day of training camp, how Shula came in and he immediately made them watch films of the Super Bowl. And again, talked about how we're never going to feel this way again. We're going to go out and win every game. And he turned to kick and said, oh boy, this is going to be a beauty. He was going to he knew they was going to put them through hell.
Yeah. So what were some of the biggest challenges as they went through the season? Was there a particular team or situation? I know you mentioned the quarterback situation. What were some of the biggest challenges on their road?
Yeah, well, that was probably the biggest. They did have some injuries, aside from Greasy.
How did that happen with the quarterback?
Oh, well, that was game 5. That was the only game that I went to. My dad and brother and I, the one game we went to was game 5 against San Diego. And we watched Bob Greasy get decked and wheeled out of there on a stretcher with a broken ankle. And everyone
and you said that's the last game I'm going to.
No, but there's this feeling of deflation, like, there goes the season. I mean, because you have an all-pro quarterback. Not many teams will come back from losing that. But Earl Morrall came in. He was 38 years old. He was the old man on the team. But he had been Shula's quarterback up in Baltimore, mostly as a backup. But he had done the same thing in 68. Johnny Unitas was out for the season, and Morrall stepped in, and they had a 15-1 season before losing they lost the Super Bowl to the Jets. But So he'd done it before, and he was just such an old, kind of a good old boy, really relaxed. He just came in and said, "All right, guys, let's keep it going," And he was just so experienced and an excellent quarterback that he was able to lead them, and keep them undefeated. And they didn't. The closest games, game three. Talk about challenges. They were down game three against up in Minnesota, and they came back and won on the last second touchdown. But that was really the closest game. The two playoff games were competitive. They were pretty close in the second half, but the Dolphins, didn't have. It seemed inevitable that they were going to win those games.
Yeah. And you said they don't really even get respect even to this day. Is there anything to provide context? What teams, what the NFL was like during that time, maybe what the travel was like,
Yeah.
or is it sort of enough to just view it as the only undefeated season ever, even through sort of today's prism?
Well, even back then, before they did it, everyone said it was impossible to do. So it wasn't like it was considered not that big a deal. Even during that season, the players would say to each other, "Well, look, we got to lose one game. Where are we going to lose?" And they keep saying, "Well, not this week. We're not going to lose this game." And it just kept going. After people have said that they had a kind of a light schedule, but it didn't seem that way before the season. They had to go and play two Super Bowl contenders on the road, Kansas City and Minnesota. Two of the teams in their division, the Colts and the Jets, were supposed to be very good. Baltimore was picked to go to the Super Bowl that year, but they had a disappointing season. Of course, each of those teams had to play Miami twice, which didn't help. So the schedule didn't seem that light going in. Looking at the records afterwards, it seems like they had an easy schedule. But, the next year they did not have an easy schedule, and they were even more dominant, even though they did lose a couple games. They lost one really close one and then one that didn't matter at the end of the season. But they dominated the next year really much more. People say that the next year they were a better team even. So, I think over the years, maybe they haven't gotten as much credit from some people, maybe based on the schedule. I don't know. But the NFL did choose them the greatest team of all time on the 100th anniversary. So I guess some people are giving them credit.
There's some respect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And 17-0 is 17-0, when you do that. Well, I was going to ask, so after that season, what sort of transpired? You said they had a dominant season right after. Did they start to lose players after that? What was the fan base like? Once you do that 17-0, sort of where did they go from there?
Yeah. Well, as I said, the next year, people say that the 72 season team can't be called the greatest ever because they were better in 73. And I think it's true. Unfortunately, after 73, they began to lose some players. In fact, before the 74 season, Zonka, Kick, and Warfield all announced they were leaving for the World Football League. But they were going to play one more year, and then they had signed for the 75 season. So the whole 74 season, they were kind of plagued by this cloud of three great players leaving, and they also had some injuries. They still had a good year. They were, I think, I don't know if they were 11-3, I think, that year. And they lost the famous game to the Raiders that year, the Sea of Hands game, where at the very end, Stabler threw this wildly pass and went through a bunch of hands for the game-winning touchdown. So that was a crushing defeat. That really ended the golden era of the Dolphins. They were pretty good the rest of the 70s, pretty good, but not great. And of course, then came the Marino years, which are, were famous years, but they couldn't quite win the Super Bowl there either, and they never have since. So they've had some good teams. Obviously, it's been rough for them since the 21st century began, but things that seem to be looking up for them again. But really, nothing has equaled those early 70s years.
Sure. And the fan base did it sort of stay all the way through to those Marino years? That what sort of these Shula, early 70s years had built?
Yeah, I think so. Especially at Shula, providing the continuity there. But yeah, I think because they never got bad. Shula only had one losing season ever. So they were very competitive through the 70s, and then they were in the Super Bowl in the early 80s without a great quarterback. David Woodley and Ostrowski was quite good, but Woodley started that Super Bowl, and then they were lucky to get Marino, and all of a sudden they have this exciting team again, this incredible offense. So yeah, I do think the fan base, definitely the excitement just continued unbroken through the Marino years, and until when Shula retired. I think that's the splitting point. They really were never too good after that.
And in those early 70s, the players, were they they were celebrities, I assume. I know you mentioned in the book, you know, that it was sort of an era before the players were millionaires and were treated like millionaires. Was that just sort of on the practice field, and then outside they were kind of the heroes, or what was that like throughout the
Well, I would say,
city?
yeah, I'd say both. I mean, they were definitely celebrities. They were huge figures in South Florida. It's just that without the enormous money, they were still like, regular people. So they tailgate after the games with the fans. They parked in the same place as the fans. As Zonk had said, they'd be walking to their car, and people would be saying, "Hey, have a beer, Zonk." And they'd start having drinking and eating
Wow.
with these guys. The cops would join them. It was a little different. But they were famous. I mean, they definitely were famous. And there was stories about they'd be partying all night, and they get into trouble with the cops, and the cops would kind of let them go because they're dolphins. So I mean, they had perks of being celebrities, but it wasn't quite as removed, I think, as it is today.
Sure. Oh, that's fascinating. The connection there. And yeah,
Yeah.
the cops have to let him go. You know, they got a game in a few hours.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, maybe shouldn't talk about drunk driving in a light way, but
Mhm.
sometimes their players would get stopped by the cops, and cops would just say, "All right, you can pick up your keys at the station." They'd take their keys away. You can pick them up at the station in the morning, rather
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
prosecuting them.
So was there anything that kind of really surprised you when you were researching the book, or anything that you know, you didn't expect as you started this process that you found?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of things were surprising because I was only 9 at the time, so my memories were very limited. Um, a lot of different things. Like, for instance, Mercury Morris, I was very surprised. He was such a great running back, and he was the second or one of the two best runners in college, along with O.J. Simpson when he was in college. And he came to Miami. And I didn't realize that his first 3 years he got very few carries, and it wasn't until '72 that he convinced Shula to give him a shot, and he had a great season, got 1,000 yards. I didn't realize that. The funny thing there's a funny story that was a surprise to me, which is everyone remembers from Super Bowl VII, Gary Yepremian's flub, where it's the most famous play of the Super Bowl, where he was lined up to kick a pretty makeable field goal to make it 17-0 in a 17-0 season, and it got blocked. The ball came back to him, and instead of just falling on it to preserve a 14-0 score, he tried to throw the ball, and it went up in the air. And when it came down, he made it even worse. He batted it up into the air again. It was incredible. And finally, Mike Bass of the Redskins grabbed it and went the other way for a touchdown. So it looks like, the final score is 14-7 instead of 17-0. And the funny thing that I learned is that looking through all the games is that just 2 months before that, the same thing had happened. I don't think people remember this. They're playing St. Louis on a Monday night. Field goal gets blocked. Instead of falling on it, he tried to throw the ball. And again, it went up in the air. That time, at least it fell to the ground. Everybody jumped on it, so it wasn't too bad. But what amazed me is that Don Shula, who was the master of detail and doing everything he could to get that winning edge, I can't believe he didn't have Garrow practicing just falling on the ball 15 minutes a day at practice, but he didn't. And 2 months later, it happened again.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. So, tell me a little bit about the cover and the title. How did that come about? Um,
Well,
they're both pretty good.
yeah, it's funny. The funny thing about the title is that when I was in college in the '80s, um, I was I was studying creative writing, and I was taking a short story workshop, and I wrote short story. It wasn't really about the team; it was about someone older than me, but someone who was like a high school senior during the perfect season, and that's the first time I wrote about that season. And I called the name of that short story was 17-0, just spelled the way it is. And I guess that stuck in my mind, and that was always my title for the book. It kind of gives a different feeling of just not just victories and losses, but a sort of a feeling of that season. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
know,
yeah.
gives you a feeling of emotion. As for the cover, Abrams Books just did a great job on the cover. That's all them, and they're the book designer. But I like the way. I think I did suggest maybe getting palm trees in, the football, but also Miami, and it has a sort of a feel of the old times in the 1970s. It's a
Oh
good
yeah,
cover.
yeah. The colors, everything, it just hits
Yeah.
perfectly. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Where can people get the book, or where can they find out more about you or it if they want to?
Yeah, well, the book's out. It's anywhere you buy books, Amazon or hopefully your local bookstore will have it. If you're in South Florida, I'm going to be down there at Books and Books in Coral Gables, like in October 22nd. And for more information, you can always check out my website, marshalljohnfisher.com. And yeah, hope they enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You're welcome back anytime, and talk next time.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Thank you.